Well, everybody, Happy New Year. I hope you had some pretty good holidays. Excited to just kind of kick off 2022 and just kind of recap a little bit of what we saw in 2021, 2020, and where we're headed in 2022. With that, cybersecurity trends in 2022. So, mid 2020 through 2021 brought unexpected change to IT departments. Organizations across the globe scrambled to enable a remote workforce while protecting those end users and corporate assets from the constantly evolving threat landscape. By and large, most IT cybersecurity teams successfully navigated those turbulent times, but with the balance between cybersecurity and remote work still hold as the world transitions from the initial change to what we now call the new normal. That's what I'd like to talk to you about today. Now, just a little bit about us, Infotech Research Group. We have around 35,000 members worldwide. We share insights that can help your organization. We spend millions in research and developing tools on a yearly basis. We have over 100 analysts that are able to help you supplement your team's knowledge. We also provide benchmarks and vendor assessments that are well developed, and we have a pretty good track record of success helping organizations. Okay. With that, let me move on to the next slide. Okay, let's get started. As a research advisor here at Infotech, I speak with security professionals daily to understand our challenges, and I spend a lot of time researching what is going on in the world of security. I've come up with three main areas that I feel should be the key focus of cybersecurity programs, and pretty much anyone who uses computers. Okay. Given the numerous incidents reported in 2021, where we saw the biggest ransomware attacks in history, I doubt anybody will be surprised to see ransomware on the list. Okay, ransomware has proliferated so rapidly in recent years because it presents the most cost-effective way for cyber attackers to make money in the shortest amount of time. Some of the perpetrators we've already read about in the news, these are people that you're familiar with, such as DarkSide Gang. These folks are responsible for the Colonial Pipeline attack. These are what they call ransomware as a service platforms. And, these cyber criminals employ their services to infect victim systems and hold data and devices ransom. The statement that you don't need to have skills, that's really true. It's more true than it sounds. The current ransomware best practice is ransomware data extortion, which is something relatively new. Not just really exfiltrating your data, but extorting you for that data. And so what they do is the attacker first exfiltrates sensitive data prior to encryption, and then demands a ransom to decrypt that data. So basically holding you hostage. And then they promise that they won't disclose the stolen data, but these are cyber criminals. Okay, let me move on to the next slide here. This has a lot of text here, and it's a lot of good context. I don't expect you to read everything here, but I wanted to highlight a few trends from the ransomware attacks that we've seen in 2020, later half, and 2021. Firstly, these are all high-profile breaches, and there are plenty that were left off the list. It seems like there is a huge ransomware incident just about every single week. That's all you hear about in the news. That's all you hear about in the community. Pretty much every webinar is based on ransomware lately. Second, if you take a look at the ransoms demanded, and in many cases, people eventually paid these cybercrime gangs. These obviously represent the upper end of the range, but the scale of ransoms is escalating significantly. I'll give you an example. Canada paid the highest ever disclosed ransom first half of the year. And more recently, as I'm sure most of you know, REvil, which really stands for ransomware evil, they demanded nearly double that amount in the Kaseya attack, which is pretty significant. So in summary, this slide shows that ransomware attackers see this as a highly profitable business, and they're expanding their focus on new markets, even smaller shops, not just the really big shops. First it was healthcare, then municipalities, states, education were targeted, but now we're seeing supply chain and critical infrastructure being targeted as well. The recent headlines have drawn a lot of unwanted attention to the ransomware industry. And as we've seen, there is new focus on smaller organizations where attackers can be paid in many small. Okay, these supply chain attacks in particular, if you just, we go back in a second here to the Kaseya attack and the widely publicized SolarWinds incident, these require advanced, well-funded criminal infrastructure. But there is a huge upside for cyber criminals to expand the blast radius of a successful attack and to create enormous pressure for a ransom to be paid. These supply chain attacks are characterized by software, hardware, or even service providers who become compromised. We saw that with SolarWinds. And attackers leverage a trusted relationship with customers to distribute malware to a far broader audience that will be feasible manually, like we saw in the beginning of 2020. The trend in recent years has been for municipalities and states, education, and healthcare, like previously discussed, to be targeted due to often limited security budgets and the public nature of their services. These are industries that fit the bill of an attractive target as described here. We've anticipated for years now that energy and critical infrastructure are ill-prepared and will become targets of cyber criminals. And sadly, that seems to be coming to pass. Criminals are seeing that corporate enterprises fit this profile of an attractive target, and they have the resources to pay significantly higher ransoms. And so it's making it really attractive. So what's happening in 2022? What is the rise in sophistication of ransomware all about? We hear about it constantly. What's changing? Well, it doesn't seem that there are different breach techniques causing the recent uptick in ransomware. The most active cyber gangs, they've all been really well studied. Like I said, you hear webinars constantly, techniques to improve your security posture. And their attack vectors are pretty familiar. But there's no reason to learn any tricks because the old tricks are still working so well. Where the sophistication of their attacks has evolved, is really in the ability of ransomware to evade detection until it delivers its payload, and in the effectiveness of the social engineering when targeting a person or organization for attack. I've heard of ransomware victims ask the question, how did they know who to send the phishing emails to for the least security aware person on staff? It's like they knew the results of our phishing simulation test. Attackers have refined their social engineering to identify and exploit high-risk individuals. The chain really is only as strong as its weakest link. And I'll leave you with some examples, as you can see on the next slide here. Identity. Identity challenges today. You can see that, surround in colonial pipeline attacks. MFA best practices. If you think about that, think of SolarWinds. Look at software vulnerabilities. And the South Korean Atomic Energy Research Institute, that was another good example of software vulnerabilities and due diligence not being applied. Okay, let's talk a little bit about data centers without data. We started with the attacks against your data. Now let's talk about how data itself is changing. So in 2021, almost 40% of all companies had adopted a cloud-first or cloud-only strategy. That is already a sizable chunk of companies embracing the cloud. But what is more interesting are the results of a recent survey where they said 87% of IT leaders said that the pandemic has caused them to accelerate their cloud adoption strategies. And on the other side, 74% of them believe that substantially all of their workloads will be in the cloud within 3 years. In my advisory role at Infotech, I speak to security leaders daily, so I truly believe this. A lot of CISOs have told me that when the pandemic hit, What they had for a VPN infrastructure was just not up to the task. It had been built to accommodate a limited number of road warriors, but certainly not the entire workforce, not even a real hybrid environment that could account for 50% of remote workers. So basically, these companies had two choices. They could throw money at upgrading their VPN infrastructure, which was on its way to becoming obsolete, or they could invest in accelerating their existing cloud adoption plans. But for most, the decision was a no-brainer. Of course, this decision is not without risk. We've seen time and time again when companies rush to the cloud without a good security plan, they often end up in the news. There's a lot of security settings that are just not enabled by default. So, almost 1 trillion records were lost in 2018. Just take a moment for that to sink in. And that's due to cloud security misconfigurations. Technology company, here's an example, Expedia, if you remember, the company that managed Expedia and other popular hotel sites lost 10 million records due to an AWS misconfiguration. So if the hospitality industry wasn't in bad shape, that was the icing on the cake. A recent study by IBM and the Ponemon Institute reports that nearly 20% of data breaches happen because of cloud misconfigs. That number has almost certainly risen since that time. So what does this all mean for our data? Traditional information security has never done a great job of actually securing information. Instead, we've put our data into data centers protected by network security. We spend huge sums of money to ensure that only secure endpoints can access that data. And we've used things like background checks, in all truthfulness, marginally effective security awareness programs, and some other controls to ensure that we could trust the people with access to the data. But things have changed in the last year. We've got accelerated cloud adoption, which is moving our data out of our security perimeter we've typically felt pretty comfortable with. We've accelerated bring your own device, which means our data is being accessed by what we would consider untrusted devices today. And we've got accelerated remote work and increasing use of contractors, freelancers, and other workforce, which means our data is being accessed by untrusted people, not just untrusted devices. There's been talk for a few years now about how security perimeter is dead, but I'll tell you, a lot of investment that had gone into building that strong security perimeter, it's just not panning out. Despite reports of their premature demise, they persisted for a while, and it's still here. The events of 20 and 2021 have been an enormous accelerator to this paradigm shift towards data centers that were protected by security. So let's see here. Moving into the cloud, let me move into slide number 12. So the last topic I'd like to discuss in the evolution of insider threats, and it's an important one to note. It's really one of the more important factors here. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time discussing this. The pandemic in and of itself has not created these new trends or new threats. It simply just hasn't. But it's been multiplying the force that is accelerating these existing trends. So take a look at this now. The current unemployment rate is a factor that is entirely the result of the pandemic, but in two different ways. As you can see here, the huge spike in unemployment that we saw last year was the immediate result of lockdowns. As retail, travel, hospitality, restaurant, and other sectors closed down, unemployment jumped to about 14% in both Canada and the US. Unemployment steadily declined as the lockdowns eased over the summer and winter months. Although, of course, it may rise again as caseloads spike, based on the current variants. Okay, move on to the next slide here. The final piece of this puzzle is the emerging new remote work normal. Take, for example, in Canada, almost 2.5 million more people were working from home this winter season versus last season. And that has been the case for more than half of a year now. Companies have become accustomed to having a large, semi-permanent work-at-home workforce. Some businesses are even seeing significant benefit to this state. such that almost a quarter of all Canadian businesses expect that a significant portion of their staff will remain remote in 2022 and perhaps beyond. And this number grows to almost 50% of companies in certain sectors such as information, culture, and professional services. Yeah, less than half of all companies currently include all the risk of remote work in their security awareness and training programs, which is a big risk. When you factor in the fact that 30% of all security incidents are caused by insider threats, it seems clear that we are headed for dangerous times. Okay, so we've arrived at this sort of vortex where recent events have caused an economic downturn that has laid off millions of workers. Many of these are turning to freelancing, and companies that are unable to add new headcount will need to bring these untrusted resources in. Meanwhile, the embrace of a remote workforce means that staff are no longer operating within the corporate security perimeter and may in fact be geographically remote offices. If you pile on the lack of effective security awareness programs, we can expect to have a breakdown in insider trust. Okay, so let's move on to some recommendations. Okay, so in recap here, use multi-factor authentication whenever possible. This is something you have, something you know, and something you are. There's a lot of buzz going on around zero trust and least privilege. And simple fact is, implement zero trust whenever possible and follow least privilege principles. Assume you can't trust anybody or anything. Patch regularly. Use vulnerability scanning tools to give you the visibility you need, both on-premise and in the cloud. Build a good security awareness program. I really want to key off on this because if you think of the shift left paradigm and really equipping your workforce with the knowledge to prevent attacks as they're mobile is one of the biggest benefits. And if you think here, what does a good security awareness program constitute? It's really carrying out effective simulated phishing. That's a big one. Many vendors have mature tools that can help you implement a successful program. And at least spend an hour out of the year, disseminating that security awareness training to your workforce. Full circle. You want to update your security awareness and training program. The days of putting up posters in lunchrooms or casually sending out cautionary emails, that just simply won't work anymore. You need to consider new innovative approaches to awareness and focus on 3 main topics in the short to midterm. Those are data security, the risk related to remote work, and general awareness. And the general awareness that I'm talking about is something that you probably heard about, but might not be that familiar with, and that's simply video and audio forgery. That's really, really becoming a prominent attack vector. If you think of buzzwords such as deepfakes, it's not just video, it's not just for a hobby. They really are getting more successful in forging audio and more successful in forging video. So yet another attack element to be familiar with. Okay, finally, foundational security capabilities like awareness and training and basic preventions are highly effective at fending off many ransomware attacks. And these basic capabilities are often found to have been absent or just simply inconsistent in the aftermath of an incident. Do the simple things well and assume that your preventions will fail because they will. Be prepared to respond and recover from an incident. I can't highlight enough how important it is to have a successful incident management program, but you should certainly devote some time to being prepared, doing tabletop exercise, and just role playing through the scenarios and making sure that you're equipped to handle an incident. The difference between people who pay and those who don't often comes down to whether they are prepared to respond and recover. So ensure that you have plans and test those plans. regularly. Thank you very much. That is my presentation today.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, having a security discussion, certainly makes sense, especially in the financial sector. So thank you for that. There were a few questions from the audience. One thing that I wanted to touch on, maybe if you can look back at your presentation, numbers that were on your dark cloud silver lining slide, were those pertaining to external cloud?
They were.
Okay.
They were pertaining to external cloud, yes.
Good. Well, hopefully we got that answered for you. And one comment that he made that I think you touched on towards the end there is it seems like a number of that was a lack of a basic security hygiene to cloud adoption. What are your thoughts there?
You're absolutely right. And I'll tell you, we more commonly see that with members asking questions about their journey into Office 365 and Microsoft 365. If you think about it, there are 7,000 parameters to configure in Microsoft 365 Azure environment. 2,000 of them are security parameters, and most of them are untouched. And it's simply, when you think about it, it's just a great value proposition, right? You can get up and running relatively quick. In a lot of cases, more secure than you were in your previous environment. But you have to have the knowledge and you have to have the foresight to go in there and really tune those parameters for your use cases. And like we said, there's quite a number of them could be pretty impactful if you don't configure them the right way.
So one reason we like working with Infotech and having you guys as kind of our lead presenters, you're vendor agnostic, so there's no sales pitch here. This is you helping IT executives get the most out of what they're already spending on, teams help. When you mentioned that however many of those implementations that could be happening within Microsoft, how do you guys go about helping your clients with activating those or walking them through them or teaching them? Right, at some point they're probably not turned on because either A, they don't know about them or they don't know how to utilize them. Right, so how do you guys help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a team that is dedicated to focusing on expertise with specific software products. I myself, I'm in the security practice, but we have a practice that covers industry, from casinos to healthcare to government. We have another practice that really covers software comparisons, software tunables, configurations, best practices. So yeah, Infotech does have the right level of advice. We take some of the knowledge that we get from other members. We have a large database of knowledge that we're able to leverage from to see, in many cases what's worked and what hasn't worked.
Got you. You mentioned again, I like that you touched on that at the end, and this goes back to the security hygiene. How often or how much should employees receive security awareness training?
I'll tell you, there's been a significant uptick towards the latter half of 2021. And I think it's like an evolution, right? So at first, a number of people were doing security awareness training. Now, what we recommend is, I mentioned an hour a year. You can certainly break that up. And what we recommend is don't do more than 5 minutes of training a month. So if you think about that, you can do 5 minutes of training a month, 15 minutes of training per quarter. That adds up to an hour a year. But, supplement that with simulated phishing. And there are many vendors out there like, I'll mention a few, Ningio, KnowBe4, they actually can cater those programs through your organization. You can modify the types of emails, the way they look, and you can make them pretty successful. You can generate some pretty good metrics. Perhaps the finance team is falling victim to phishing attacks more than the marketing team, and you can do some analysis as why that would be. So these gives you the insights that typically were not there before.
Got it. One other question, and this is all I'm taking it from your presentation, so we'll get to the smart people's questions in a second, but I'm not so smart. Let me get this out of the way. Why do you think the database backups may not be enough to prevent payouts of ransomware demands?
Sure, and that's a great question. I think in 2021, beginning of 2021, maybe the middle of 2021, the fear was they're going to get into my environment. they're going to take my data and they're going to go ahead and encrypt it. I will not have any access to the data, and it's going to bring basically my organization down to a screeching halt. Well, that seemed to be the case. And now what they're doing is they're certainly doing that, but they're exfiltrating that data. They're removing that data from your premises to somewhere where they'll inspect it, and they'll tell you, look, I have Carlos's data and I can tell you his birth date, where he lives. If you look at healthcare, I know his medical conditions. I have before and after pictures like we see with healthcare, before you had plastic surgery, for example, in a lot of cases. So now they're holding you hostage to say, well, I have the data, and unless you pay up, yes, you can restore and get operational again, but I'm going to release that data and I'm going to majorly impact you. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And in those
Actually
cases,
don't matter then, huh?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Are you seeing a lot of video and audio forging?
We are actually seeing, I wouldn't say a significant amount, and definitely not on the video side. I think the video is relatively new. I think as people become more, more familiar with the technology and they make it easier for people to leverage, it's going to pick up. But certainly audio forgery is becoming more commonplace.
Mhm.
That's definitely one that we've heard about recently.
Okay. Well, there's some questions from the audience. Question here: workplace analytics is becoming mainstream, helping people and businesses to improve productivity and well-being, especially when we are commuting less and virtually meeting more. Do such tools comply with applicable international laws and regulation when it comes down to protecting data privacy?
That's a really good question. Yeah, absolutely. It could be a privacy concern in some countries, and that's stuff that we have. We have a dedicated privacy team at Infotech that can help those members make the right call. What's appropriate, get legal involved. In many cases, privacy team, and in some cases, HR to see what is doable. But that's a great question. Absolutely.
Okay. One other question here. IT and security teams are often overwhelmed by the wide array of tools, technologies, and processes at their disposal to combat ransomware. Is AI for cybersecurity an answer? Because it seems like hackers have already started tampering with cybersecurity AI.
Yeah, I mean, that's another really good question, and I'm sure most of the panel or most of the people in this video call know. But you can take a look at the the beginnings of antivirus, and now a really common acronym, endpoint detection and response, EDR. You even have MDR, XDR, NDR, all these DRs. That's really taking kind of the proactive approach and behavior analytics to not just looking at a simple signature. Back in 2021, 2020, when you had these attacks, you'd analyze the signature, you'd validate it, it was in the database, and it would flag it. Now, what we're really seeing is the use of AI, and AI can see patterns, right? For example, Carlos logs in at 8 o'clock and runs Outlook, the Outlook executable. So I'm going to go ahead and validate that that is an appropriate action for Carlos around the same time frame. Now, Carlos logged in tomorrow at 8 o'clock, and he's running Spotify. He's never ran Spotify before. I'm going to quarantine that, and I'm going to go ahead and flag that for further investigation. So I'll say, with AI, I mean, the evolution of these tools at our disposal are really giving us a chance. It's really hard to keep up with these bad actors, but AI is certainly helping us. Machine learning is helping us. A large amount of data to draw from is definitely a great tool that we have at our disposal now.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to piggyback on that, because this is another question on privacy and compliance. How do you prevent them to be a showstopper for your progress and still serve their proper functions and keep the enterprise compliant?
Not sure if I understand that fully.
So regarding privacy and compliance, how do you prevent them from being a showstopper on constantly having to worry about privacy and compliance, and still serve their proper functions to keep the enterprise compliant?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is to look at what regulatory, obligations you have, right? It could be, for example, it could be SOX compliant. It could be Sarbanes-Oxley. It could be PCI DSS. And from there, you'd have to investigate, what controls can we apply? What area do we operate in? Those are all factors you need to consider. And we have a large amount of members that have successfully solved for those problems. I will say with GDPR, that's just another factor that has to be brought into account, right? When we talk about, personally identifiable information and what you're able to do with that, specifically with AI, that has been somewhat of a concern, but I will say North America, it has not been that much of a concern to date.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Would you say that, and Tanweer actually listed this in the chat, but training styles, do they obviously need to match the company's culture, employee comprehension levels, team levels, learning preferences? How do you go about organizing that for your partners?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we have at Infotech, we have what we call a blueprint, which is, a blueprint really gets a company the information they need, the knowledge they need to build a successful security awareness program. But I will also mention that certainly you have to tune that towards the organization, the culture, and you have to fine tune it, right? Your metrics have to be accurate. You have to establish the right parameters, but certainly you can deliver the content. And let me kind of go back to a couple of the vendors like KnowBe4, Ningio, and some of the other ones. They can develop and they can cater to you and build the exact development program that you're looking for. So think of like they can do a cartoon-based video, they can do an anime video. If it's healthcare, they can do a healthcare-based type of video for your workforce. Going back, they can make it as small or as large as you'd like, and they can, another important factor of this is having relevant questions, right? So if today we're seeing a lot of attacks via the COVID mechanism, COVID vaccine, click here, then we certainly want to use something that's relevant today. We don't want to use something from 2 years ago. So these vendors in our program certainly take all those things into account. It has to be relevant and it has to be timely.
One of the follow-ups was, you mentioned a lot about, the blueprints and stuff. Is that just templates, or is that customizable, on a customer basis? How does that work?
No, you're absolutely right. So the blueprints, and just let me give you a little bit of background. The blueprints are their material. Our team is essentially composed of pretty smart individuals, PhDs that is their job, doing quality research. And they put together these programs that have workbooks, presentations, boardroom ready presentations that any member can repurpose. Simply just put your company name, change whatever you need, and you're ready to go. It's a tremendous time saver.
Okay, awesome. One question was, is there a breakup between, as far as the data is concerned, between large organizations and small to mid enterprise regarding the reported security incidents, or is it just kind of a peanut butter spread across? Doesn't matter the size of the organization, they're attacking equally.
Yeah, they're definitely attacking equally. That's a great question. I think it's just the opportunity, right? They're going after anybody, and I mean anyone they could possibly, fool into baiting on ransomware and phishing emails. They're going after them. Even here locally in the Las Vegas area, there's been several healthcare outfits. UMC got hit by ransomware. The city of Henderson got hit by ransomware. So absolutely, from large healthcare providers to local municipalities, nobody is dodging the bullet on this one. They're going after absolutely everybody. And one thing to note is they'll adjust their pricing. I was surprised to find that companies now are providing services to small and larger companies. There are companies such as Coveware that will actually handle the whole event for you, from the negotiation to knowing who these cyber criminals are, giving you a kind of a confidence level on, look, if you pay, they're going to go ahead and really destroy the data. And for somebody that's not navigated these waters, if you reach out to CISA and the FBI, they might take your systems for a certain amount of time to inspect them. where you won't have access to them, right? So it's not a bad idea to reach out to them, but it's a good idea to have somebody along with your legal team that can help you guide you through this. For example, in a lot of cases that I've seen, Codeware, for example, has recommended that the perpetrator share a AWS remote session and show them that they're deleting it. Obviously, that's not 100%, but it takes this in a direction that really tries to cover the more usual scenarios. Delete the files, don't share them, their track record. And one last thing that I want to leave you with is that these ransomware outfits are sometimes hired guns. They don't even know what they're really doing. It's a call center that they enlist to handle the calls for payment. So they've completely got this set up like a real 2021, 2022 call center ready to make money.
Wow. Wow. Good Lord. Yeah. Question here. Interesting, actually. Should employers provide financial incentives to remote workers for security tools or appliances at their homes? Is that something the company should be responsible for?
That's a really good question. I think it depends for sure, right? I think I made a point a little bit earlier about least privilege and zero trust. And I'm going to really try to stay away from all the acronyms because there's just a lot of them, right? But you'll hear something that's currently in the news called Secure Access Service Edge. Some people call it SASE. That's really just removing the perimeter, treating every device as an untrusted device, bring your own device, and then securing every destination. That could be the machine that you're signing on from has, a token that's validated for a week based on multi-factor. For example, you could use Microsoft Authenticator, you could use Google Authenticator, Duo, whatever your tool might be. And that gives you a level of trust on your device. But then when you reach that destination, let's say you want to use Salesforce, you might get challenged again. And at that point, you might have to re-authenticate and show another factor. So the idea of, sort of putting endpoint detection or response on a remote worker's, endpoint is not a bad idea for sure. But the mindset's really moving towards a completely untrusted device and really securing that target endpoint that you're trying to reach with least privilege principles.
Got you. Well, thank you. We are